Hello there, this is going to be another MagJS tutorial. We're going to do something really fun. We're going to create a simple toggle button, a component that all it does is it has a button and has some text that's going to toggle. Why don't we check out what this looks like actually. This is coming from a React example. You can see here this little button, and as you click it, it changes the text on, off, on, off. So we're going to do that same thing in MagJS. So as we always start at the MagJS homepage on GitHub, and we're going to go to our boilerplates. We'll create a blank one. We're going to do this one in code pen, actually. Be kind of fun. First thing I'm going to do is fork it the project. Okay. Now, what I want to do is, as you see here, we have an app component already. And our app component is going to be our top level container. So you can see here, if I change the B, if I change it to bold, it shows bold on the right there. Okay. Now, what I want to have is a toggle button. So I'm going to create a toggle tag, and inside there it's just going to be button text. We'll call it toggler. That's some default values. Now, what I want to happen is I want that button, okay? I want that button to show up into my app area here, okay? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create our component. So it's going to be basically exactly like our current app component. It's going to be called toggle. And this is like what you do initially is just create a simple static version of all your stuff just to piece it all together. Now, instead of the bold, we're going to have button and we're going to say in app. Okay, so we want our toggler button to say in app and to appear in here. But instead of a bold, why don't we put it in a div? Okay, let's say this div bold. We're going to say toggle like that. And as you can see there, it says in-app now. So we know that our toggle button is coming into our app component here. Just to verify, let's put some text on top and something on bottom, just to show that we have it separate. Okay, so we know that now our toggle component is happening into our app component, putting one component to another. That's pretty neat. But as you see here, we really wanted to say on and off. And why don't we tell it? Because the component itself is dumb. It doesn't know anything unless you tell it something. So that's why we have our props. And we're going to pass it text. And we're going to call it on. Okay. So it's going to use the props that it gets, the properties, and it's going to say, now it's going to say on there. Okay. That's still, it's an improvement, but what we really want is something dynamic that maintains state. Kind of like the React example here. As you can see, it sets some initial state to is toggled on, and then based on a handle click, it changes that state and it re-renders the component that way. So what we need to do now is we want to create a stateful component. See, these two here that you see are both stateless. So usually you would have your top level or parent container become the stateful one. And that's what we're going to do here. So the easiest or simplest way to modify your existing components and to make them into stateful is all we have to do is simply change it into an object. So we take the same component, we have it in an object, and we're going to initialize it with our controller. Okay, the controller is called only once when you are first creating it, when it first runs. So now we have it, but notice that the button is not appearing. So what the question is, why isn't the button appearing? Now, because it is a stateful component, it renders a little bit differently than the stateless. Stateless ones are synchronous, it runs right away, while the stateful ones are asynchronous. They wait for the request animation frame. So because of that, we actually have to create another container to put it in. So we're going to say app, and we want it to happen in the body tag. And there you go. So now you see it's replacing the entire body tag with the app. So we told it to run the app, which is stateful. This is Mag. We're telling Mag to do this and put it in the body container. It's kind of a little shortcut. There's another way to do this as well. You don't have to have a stateful component be a component. You can simply say mag.module. The only thing though is in this case, you'll have to do one thing a little bit differently, and that's you need to make this into an ID. So you would say something like this, div uh, ID equal app, like that, and then it goes, you see top and bottom. And this might be what you want. There's some flexibility here. You can do things differently. In this case, it's only happening here. It didn't replace the whole body, for instance. That's just one example. Also, you don't need that extra bit of code here. You really use it as a reference like this is when you want to call it somewhere else. But if you want it to run right away at this point, that's fine. But if you wanted a reference and maybe you wanted to pass some properties, you would call it this way. But for this example, we're just going to do a mag module, and we're going to have our top and bottom, and it's going to just be over here. So we have our controller, it's all set. We have our toggle button being added, our toggle component. But again, this is not really stateful. Let's look back at the example here. The example here, you see how they initialize state with is toggle. Why don't we grab that guy? He's probably our most important piece of information. So one thing to know is how to access state. In the controller, it comes through the this keyword or this property, and that's how you set state from the controller. Now this, in this context, is not the object itself. It's not the object that has a controller. It's just the state. So that only happens in the controller. So this literally equals our state. So our default value for our toggle is going to be true. We're going to default it to true. Now, I'm not quite sure this makes any sense to be here anymore. And there's another part of MagJS you have to know that's important is the view. Now, the question is, what's the difference between the view and the controller? Well, the controller is run only once when it is initially declared, while the view is called on every change to the state. Okay. And also another thing to note is that this is the state in the controller, but this in the view and every other method in the object is the object itself. So how do you access the state then, right? Well, if you put this over here, there's a couple of options. So like I said, this becomes the object, but now state is available. So you can say if this state equals div, for instance, you can do it like that. And now you can see it says top on bottom. Okay. There's also a shortcut. You can do state that comes in the argument there. So you can do it like that as well. Let me just do a little code cleanup. I'm not sure. Oh, I think I'm missing the bracket. There we go. Okay. So I think we're all set to get started. We have our initial state. We have our view calling our component. It has a text value, but we really want the text value to be based on our state, right? So why don't we do that? So we're going to say state, whoops, we're going to say state dot is toggled. If it's true, it should be on. If it's not, it's going to be off like that. Okay. Now the next part we need to do is we need something to change that state. So we're going to create a handle click method up here, right in our object. Now remember, every other object besides controller, the this equals the object itself, and to access the state, you would just say this dot state, like we showed down here. Okay, I can go like that. Okay, they all equal the same thing. The state, this is just a shortcut, but it's all the same thing. So here, this equals the object, and then this dot state equals the state. So I think what we want to do is we want to pass the handle click that happens when the buttons click. So our component needs to be updated here, because right now the component is simply saying button equals props text, but we really want to have an on click, right? So we're going to say on click handler, and this is going to be a pass-through props. We're going to say on click button. Okay, so we have to pass that from up over here. We're going to say on click equals to this dot handle click. Now, how do we know that's happening? Well, we can affect the state from our handler. We can say this dot div equal, for instance, clicked. So we're saying when this on click is called, our component is passing it through, and then it's going to call our handler up here, which has back access to the state. So let's see what happens. If I click this on, we are expecting div, the entire div, to now equal clicked. Now you notice nothing happened, and there's a reason for that. The reason is because every time that state is changed, our view gets called. And the view is what's most important, because the div, if you see here in the view, equals our toggle button. So even though I'm changing it here, the view is getting called when the state gets changed. So any change to the state calls the view, and that's the difference between the view and the controller. The controller is only called initially once. The view is called on every change to the state. So changing the div really doesn't do anything. So what should we do here? What we want to change is our toggle. So why don't we do that? So we're going to say is toggle equal to false. That's really simple. So now when I click it, it should change it from true to false. And we're saying down here, when that happens, you should change the text as well for the component. So let me click it and see what happens. Oh, and it changed it to off. Now that's pretty neat. But what happens if I click it again? It's always telling it to be false. So what we really want to do is we want to toggle it, toggle the state. So all you have to do is take that same state and just flip it like this. Okay, so now when I click on, it'll change it to off. And when I click it again, I'll change it back to on and so on and so forth. See? And that's basically it. Um, it's a pretty straightforward component. It's a pretty straightforward tutorial. There's not much here, but we talked about some basic concepts in Mag. We talked about how to put a component into another, how to access state, the different ways to access state, some shortcuts, things like that. So I hope you enjoyed it. I will save this code pen and I'll put the link into the video. And until next, thanks again. Bye.